But when I look at that word, to me, I think of Finding Nemo, and and he called the sea, you know, where he lived, an anemone, an anemone, an anemone. Anyway.
Charity and make whatever, from your fashion to your comfort. Anything you need, know she got it covered. It's like magic. Never doubt the passion, thread the work, never lacking. Take notes, needle mover out of habit. Knit girl magic.
Hey y'all, welcome to my podcast. This is the Knit Girl Magic podcast, episode 10. So it has been a while. Today is Sunday, March 10th. So it's been about 2 months, a little more, since I've last recorded. No, scratch that. I recorded an episode, but I was not happy with it. I had a lot of cleavage showing, and we couldn't do that. I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't do that to me. So I am recording this episode again. For those of you who are new here, my name is Charity. I am from a small town in North Carolina where I live with my husband and our 2 children, Aiden and Aubrey. And I understand why so many podcasters will have some sort of intro like that at the beginning of their episodes, because we have lots of new people and I want you to know who I am. So I'm Charity, and thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for those of you who are new subscribers, new viewers. I love having you here, and I'm so excited to be sharing what I've been knitting with you this episode. I've been knitting for about 3.5, going on 4 years now, and in this podcast, I share with you my knitting adventures. It is the typical knitting podcast episode. I will start with the things that I have finished, the things that I'm wearing somewhere in there, and then I'll share with you my whips. And I don't usually do acquisitions. That's not one of the things that I like to see, but if I do have some new yarn and I'm going to use it, I do like to share that at the end. I don't have any to share today. Today, I actually have 3 finished objects. It has been 2 months since you've seen me, and even though I don't get to record podcast episodes often, I do knit as much as I can. So I have 3 finished objects, and I have 2 works in progress that I'm working on, and some ideas of what I want to cast on in the future, but no concrete plans to cast those on. So before we get into the knitting, some of you may just be wondering, where in the world have you been, girl? I know. It's just, I hardly have words. And I won't go into this too long because I know that most of you are here just for the knitting, but really just busy. And I know so many of you are too, but to actually find the time to sit down and actually deliver my thoughts, it's just hard. And so where I've been is working, you know, I'm a teacher for those of you who are new here, so that keeps me busy. And then I come home to my 2 children and I try to have enough energy for them. Meanwhile, I squeeze in any knitting that I can. And over the past 2 months, we've just been sick. We've just been having one sickness after the next, It usually starts with the kids and then it trickles down to us, and we've just been trying to survive in the winter months. And thank God that mostly all of us are on the mend now. Our baby, Aubrey, she's 2. She does have a little something going on right now, but it's nothing major. We've had the flu already. We've had the stomach bug already. We've had a little pink eye mixed in there, a little tonsillitis for me. But we're good. God is good. We're healthy, and we're just going to keep on moving. Spring is around the corner, so hopefully we'll have better health in the months to come. So let's get into the knitting. I'll start with what I'm wearing. I'm actually wearing 2 pieces of knitting today, which is odd because it's quite warm in North Carolina these days. Actually, today is a little on the cooler side for us. It's about 50 degrees. It's a little too warm for all this wool though. But the reason I'm wearing it is because I want to show off my new home cardigan by K-Dree. I'll get into that in a second. And I'm wearing this hat because my hair underneath it is just a mess. I've got twists going on here that need to be redone, and what you gonna do? I need to sit down and record, so I threw this hat on top of it for the day, and we're just gonna make it work. The hat that I'm wearing is the Ruched Close hat by designer Betty Jones, and I knit this hat about a year ago after knitting one for my Aunt Shawn. She found the pattern on Etsy and asked me to knit a hat for her. We have like a little barter situation going on. I usually ask for her to sew something for me. In exchange, I'll knit something for her. So I knit her a hat and then loved it so much that I knit one for myself. It's supposed to fit a little more slouchy than it does on me. So if I knit this pattern again, I would extend it and make it longer, which would mean just doing 1 or 2 more repeats of the ruching at the top, and I think that it would have the fit that it's supposed to. But I enjoy this hat. It definitely serves the purpose. I can throw it on my head when I'm having like a rough hair day. It's not well, it is warm because it is made out of Malabrigo, chunky. I think the colorway is Rhodesian. It is warm, but it doesn't cover my ears on this side so much. So I just use it when I need to cover up the mess that might be happening on my head, like today. Anyway, this is the Ruched Close hat by Betty Jones. It is a really cute pattern. You can find this on Ravelry. You can find this on Etsy. I think it is just a very cute pattern. So the other piece of knitting that I'm wearing that I alluded to before is the home cardigan by designer Kay Dree. I will insert images of me wearing this because you can't really get the whole idea, but this is the home cardigan by Kay Dree. And this is the first cardigan that I ever knit, and I really enjoyed the experience. I think that it took me a while to actually want to knit a cardigan because of the fact that it's knit flat. But knitting it flat actually didn't bother me at all. I do knit continental, so that was kind of my worry there, is that purling, when you purl continental, can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. But I think as long as I really pay attention to the way that I am tensioning my yarn and not gripping it too tightly, purling actually isn't so bad for me. And this cardigan was a breeze to knit, and I would knit it again. So the home cardigan is a bulky weight pattern. Kay Dree suggests that you use a lace weight and an Aran together to get that bulky weight of yarn, and that is what I did. The gauge for this pattern is about 15 stitches per 4 inches. So I decided to use some Lion brand fisherman's wool that I had been really wanting to use. This is the color Birch Tweed, I believe. So as you can see, there's lots of little tweedy bits. So it is mostly wool and then a little bit of acrylic for the tweedy bits sprinkled in there. This yarn is an Aran weight yarn. I held it together with Drops Kid Silk mohair, and it makes for a really, really woolly, warm cardigan, which I love. I mean, that's what Kay Dree intended for it to be, and I think that the yarn combination that I use is definitely what I got with this cardigan. And I have been enjoying wearing it. I can't wear it so much now that the weather is warming up, but I started knitting this cardigan back in November. It was actually around Thanksgiving holiday. My husband and I went to visit his mom for Thanksgiving, and I started this cardigan. Then I actually started it 2 times because I thought I wanted to knit a medium, and then I changed my mind and decided to knit a size small because I wanted a more form-fitting fit. After knitting the Salty Days sweater that I knit by Kuta Vikika, Veronica Lindberg, that was very oversized, and it's the sweater that I finished right before casting this one on. So for this cardigan, I decided that I wanted a tighter fit, so I actually knit the size small. This pattern told you to pick a size that would have about 8 to 10 inches of positive ease, so I went with the size small, which was a 43-inch bust, which would give me about 7.5 inches of positive ease. And honestly, I have not taken the time to measure this afterwards to see how much positive ease I have, but you can just kind of see how it looks on me. It is definitely not too oversized. It's definitely not too form-fitting. I don't know. I would say that maybe it has about 7 inches of positive ease, but I can't be sure. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't know. I got what I wanted in this cardigan. It's a cardigan that's a little bit more form-fitting, and that's really all there is to say about the fit. The last time that we spoke about this cardigan in January, did I say that it took about 2 months to finish it? I started knitting this November 21st and finished it January 21st. So it took me exactly about 2 months to finish it. I was going to talk about where I left off the last time that we spoke. So the last time we spoke, I had knit the body of the cardigan and I had finished one whole sleeve. I did modify the sleeve cuff. Instead of doing a 1x1 ribbing, I opted to do sort of like a slip stitch cuff, and it gave a much neater cuff than a 1x1 rib. I'll link the tutorial for that down in the description box below, but I really did enjoy doing that slip stitch cuff. Every time I look at it, I think that, oh, it's so tidy, and I did that. I love it. So the last time we spoke, I still needed to knit the button band and the other sleeve, which obviously I did because I have 2 sleeves now. I know, I'm silly. Okay, stay focused. All right, so I was a little bit nervous about knitting the button band because with this being my first cardigan, I had never knit one before. So I was a little nervous about picking up all of the stitches, but I made it through. It really wasn't difficult to pick up the stitches because I'm sort of used to it, being that I knit a lot of sweaters where I have to pick up stitches to knit like the shoulders and then the sleeves. So that actually was a breeze. And I didn't think that the button band actually took too long to knit either. I mean, it was a lot more stitches than I'm used to knitting, but I don't know, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't bad at all. All of the fears that I've had about knitting a cardigan, it was fine. Everything turned out fine. So I really enjoyed knitting the button band. The button holes, I was a little nervous about doing those, and those were a breeze. It's just all you're doing is simply casting off some stitches in the middle of your work and then casting them back on again. So that was actually a breeze also. The other thing that I was nervous about for the button band was the bind off. I mentioned in the last episode that I did the Italian tubular bind off for the hem of the cardigan, and it took me forever. I didn't enjoy it, so I was really nervous about doing the Italian tubular bind off for the button band. So I decided, you know, I'm going to follow the pattern, and I started doing the Italian bind off for the button band, and I think I got about 4 inches in, and I just said, forget it. I'm not gonna do this anymore. And the reason it was so difficult is because, of course, I was working with a strand of the fisherman's wool and then a strand of the silk mohair, and the amount of yarn that you have to work with to do that bind off is just insane. The yarn just goes forever and ever. And the mohair, if you've ever tried to do anything sewn with mohair, you know that it can just be a tangled mess. And after I got about 4 inches done, the yarn kept getting tangled. I was so frustrated. I was sick at the time. I said, forget it, I'm ripping this out. I ripped it all out, and I decided to go with the regular smegular bind off in pattern. And that took me about 30 minutes, and I was so relieved to have done the cast off that way in the end. And I think it looks very nice. I'll come a little closer. Excuse my pajama bottoms. Yeah, it's that kind of day. I think it looks very, very tidy. And I did have a viewer, her podcast name is Knit Desserts. And she was like, just do the regular bind off. I think it looks good, girl. Thank you for telling me that, because it does. It looks great. And I took some time to reflect after that moment of frustration. And I just had to stop and think, why were you going to push yourself to do this Italian bind off for this button band when you knew you didn't want to do it? And I think it's just the perfectionist in me. And not that I expect everything that I do to be perfect, but I'm sort of a rules follower when it comes to my knitting. And I guess in life, I'm a rules follower. So if someone tells me to do something a certain way because it's going to have a nicer appearance, then that is typically the route that I will go. All that being said, I've decided that I just need to let that go. If I don't want to do a particular cast on, a particular cast off, because I'm just not in the mindset to do it, I don't have to do it. I have enough skills under my belt where I can choose a different cast on. I can choose a different cast off or bind off. And as long as I'm okay with the appearance of it, that's all that matters. So it was just a good time for me to reflect and just kind of let go of that need to be perfect, that need to follow directions exactly as they are prescribed, and just do what makes me happy. And in the end, binding off regularly in pattern was the best route for me. The only other thing that I'll share about is the buttons. So I have obviously sewn on a button before, a button or two, but I'm really not experienced with sewing on buttons. So after I finished knitting the cardigan, blocking the cardigan, I did wet block this cardigan, and it took no time to dry it out. I was very surprised. After I did all of that, it took me about 2 weeks to actually sew on the buttons, just because it's just one of those finishing things that I didn't want to do. I'm not extremely comfortable with doing. So it took me a while to actually sit down and do that. But I came across a tutorial by Suzanne Bryan. I believe that's her name. And if I'm incorrect, I'll put it on the screen. But she's a genius. She is a master knitter. She's a very talented teacher. You know, some people can knit and they can do, but they can't teach. And some people are brilliant at teaching. And she's just one of those people that I can go to time and time again when I want to learn how to do a technique, or when I want to perfect a technique. Let me not say perfect, because we're not aiming for perfection, but whenever I want to solidify a technique, I will say she's one of those people that I can go to. And she has a tutorial for how to sew on a button using another button inside of the cardigan. And I did that, and I won't show it here because I don't have a shirt on under this, but I use that tutorial. And so the purpose in doing that is to save your very precious knitted fabric. Instead of using your needle, you know, to go in and out of your yarn, you actually go through the button that's underneath here. So for each of these buttons, I have another button on the inside that I went through to sew it on, and it was genius. Like, she's amazing. It made the process of sewing on the button a whole lot easier, because I knew I was just going in and out through the buttons. So thank you, Suzanne Bryan, for that tutorial, and I will link that down below. And that's really all I have to say about the home cardigan. I think that it's an amazing pattern. Cage Ree writes her patterns very well. She's not too wordy. She gives you just the amount of information that you need. I'm never wondering, like, what does she mean? Why? No, she's just really good. Her patterns are really good. So I would definitely recommend this pattern if you're looking for a chunkier, more heavy cardigan. So my next finished object that I have is a pair of socks. I am one of those knitters who always has to have a pair of socks on the needles. They are my comfort knit. They are something that I can take with me when I go to work and I have some downtime, or if I have a doctor's appointment, a soccer practice, soccer game, whatever it may be. I always like to have a pair of socks with me. So I finished these. And I am just calling these my Enchanted Village variegated socks. I casted these on around December, like around Christmas time in December when I finished Aiden socks. And I finished them, oh yeah, this is a bookmark. That will help me with knowing where my notes are. I finished them in February. I finished them around February 22nd. So again, about 2 months. It takes me about 2 months to do everything, apparently. So I knit these using Sesium yarn. And I got this from one of the yarn stores local to me. And the colorway is Enchanted Village, and it's their merino sock base. And their merino sock base is 75% superwash merino wool and 25% nylon. And these are just a basic vanilla sock. When I knit socks, I'm typically doing a basic pattern. Like I said, it's my comfort knitting. I don't like to think about it too often. And I always use the pattern by Kay from the Crazy Sock Lady. She is the woman who taught me virtually how to knit socks. And that is the pattern that I use. I knit the size medium for me, which I think is 64 stitches. And for this pair, I did use some leftover yarn that I had. When I tell you this sock yarn goes a long way, I used the yarn that I had left over from knitting Aiden socks, and I knit an entire pair of adult medium-sized socks in this yarn. It's called Life in the Long Grass, and I'm talking about the teal color here. My sister-in-law and my brother gifted me with some yarn that they got when they went to Ireland, and I was able to knit a full pair of socks for her. I decided to gift my sister-in-law with those socks. I used some of that yarn for a contrast heel and toe for Aiden's socks, my 10-year-old, my now 10-year-old, and then I still had enough to use for me, for a contrast color for these socks. So I know that hand-dyed yarn can be very, very pricey, but you do get, I think it's worth it. I mean, you get so much yarn. This yarn has now been included in 3 pairs of socks. I think that's good, and I'm a frugal person, but I think that it's well worth the money. So yeah, I knit these using size 1 needles, Chalgoo red lace. I always use my Chalgoo red lace. I do magic loop. I do know how to knit socks using double pointed needles, but I really just love my Chalgoo red lace needles, and I enjoy doing magic loop on those for socks. I don't like doing magic loop for everything, but for socks. I always knit my socks cuff down, and I do a regular heel flap and gusset, and I will knit the foot until the yarn covers my pinky toe, and then I'll stop and knit the toe. Like I said, I don't do any measuring. I don't do anything special when it comes to knitting socks. I just knit until it looks right, and I'll proceed with the next step. But I do want to always make sure that the foot is long enough to cover my foot. So I will try them on, which is why I like doing magic loop, and I make sure that this part covers my pinky toe, and that typically works for me to go ahead and start knitting the toe. And that's how I do it. Can't wait to finally wear these now. I don't know about y'all, but I do wear my hand knit socks in the summertime we keep the air conditioning, my husband freezes me in the summer and he keeps the air conditioning blasting. So I do like to wear my socks all year round. Let me know if you like wearing your hand knit socks all year round. So the last finished object that I have to share is actually this beanie. This is the Hidden Scraps beanie by Haley Carter, and she is a new designer. I actually knit this as a test knit, my first test knit, and it was very, very fun. It was definitely a good experience to get my first test knit under my belt. The reason that I decided to knit this hat, well, there are a couple of reasons. One is because I knit this hat for a very, very special person, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the other reason is because I think the idea of this is just genius. So I follow Haley on Instagram, and she was just posting about having an idea to knit a chunky hat with a triple thick brim, and she wanted to use scraps to do it. And she had knit a sample, and she had put pictures on Instagram with the little hidden scraps kind of peeking through, and I thought, that is genius. I mean, so I talked about how the sock yarn that we use to knit socks, or whatever you use it for, goes such a long way. You usually have so much of it left over. This is how much sock yarn I have left over from my Enchanted Village socks. So all that to say, we usually have so much of this sock yarn left over and we're not really sure what to do with it. So the fact that she created this hat using scrap yarn was very intriguing to me. So I decided to sign up for her test knit, and I'm so glad that I did. So all of the information for this is actually in my Ravelry. I usually don't put my projects in Ravelry, but after doing this, I can definitely see the benefit of that. You can help other people out with the details that you put in there. You can also go back and look at your own notes for reference. So the yarn that I used, oh, and my Ravelry name is Cherry Knits 2021, if you want to check it out. So the yarn that I used for the main color is Manos del Uruguay and their Alegria base. It's sock yarn held double, and that's what she calls for in the pattern, is for you to use whatever scraps you have and whatever main color you have, you're going to hold that double, and you get this nice squishy fabric. So I used that for the main color, and then if you kind of peek here, you can see that I also used the yarn, if you were here last time, that I used to knit Aiden's socks. This red color here is Cesium Yarns. It's their merino sock base in the colorway Poppin'. And I thought I wasn't going to have enough of that. You can see it's actually a very long hat. I thought I wasn't going to have enough of that, so I decided to use some really old sock yarn that I had just to kind of extend the hat and make sure that I would have enough yarn. So that's why we have the little pink stripes going on there. And I actually didn't need to use that. I would have been fine with just continuing with the red color the whole time. But as you can see, it really does not matter what color you use for your scraps, because when you fold it up, for the most part, you will not see those scraps. Okay. Now I know you can see mine, the pink scrap. And I've been thinking about why that is. So if you look at the other testers' sample hats and then Haley's sample hat, they did not have like any kind of color peeking out of their hat. That was supposed to be hidden. And I couldn't figure out why you could see that on mine. But what I think happened was when I started knitting the hat, so you actually start knitting, let's see, here. Is that where you start? I know I started with my scrap yarn, so this red yarn, and then I knit, and I included the pink color, the pink stripes, and then you fold that to make a regular folded brim. And when I did that, I must have knit this part maybe a tad too long is the only reason that I can guess, so that when I folded it up and seamed that brim together, you can still see it peeking through. That's the only reason that I could think of as to why maybe my hat, you can still see some of that scrap peeking out, is that somewhere along the way, either with the black, maybe I didn't knit it long enough, or maybe this section of scraps I knit too long. Either way, the next time I'll just be more careful in measuring. But I think it's okay. I think it's kind of cute to have just that little delicate little pink there at the top of the brim. So I don't think I said I knit this hat for my Aunt Shawn. And if you've been here for a while, or if you were here last time, you know that we had a long conversation about gift knitting, or just knitting for other people, and how I had made a declaration that I wasn't going to knit for other people. Yes, I know I said that, but my Aunt Shawn is different. She is different. Like I said, we just have a very special relationship. She is a crocheter. She is also a sewist. Is that the term? Sewist. So I know that whatever I knit for her, she's going to appreciate. She did kind of sort of ask me to knit this, but not really. So in our last conversation that we had about this, I had said that if I have the idea to knit something for someone, I get more joy out of that rather than someone requesting or asking me to knit something for them. And I had decided that I wasn't going to knit for people if they asked me to. I would only knit for someone if I had the idea. Like I said, my Aunt Shawn, we sort of have like this relationship where we barter. So she'll usually do something for me, and in return, I'll do something for her. And I know that she's going to appreciate whatever I do for her, just like I always adore what she does for me. So she actually sewed a quilt for Aubrey for her 2nd birthday. She has sewn her another quilt before that we absolutely adore. And I asked her to do this maybe even like a year ago. It was an idea that I saw on the web somewhere where you could take your baby's clothes for their 1st year of life, and instead of donating them or passing them down, you could actually take them and sew them together so that you can have like an heirloom or something, you know, to keep for your baby that you'll always treasure and remember just those precious times that you had in their 1st year of life. And so that's what I did. My husband and I had worked to gather some of Aubrey's favorite clothes since she was born, and we gave those to my Aunt Shawn and asked her to create this quilt for us. And she was so excited to do it. And I'll insert footage of Aubrey underneath the blanket. She loves it so much. We love it so much. We all use it. So anyway, when Shawn brought the quilt over for me, she didn't request that I knit her a hat, but she just kind of mentioned, and she had mentioned before, that after I knit her this hat, and I think it was a brown color, that she wanted a black one. She wanted like an everyday hat that she could wear, that she wouldn't really have to like match her clothing or anything. So she just kind of mentioned that when we were here talking about the blanket, and I was like, I gotcha. And I didn't tell her that I was going to do it. Like I said, I don't know, it's just a thing. Like, I would rather have the idea and knit something for someone secretly rather than them requesting it. So I saw that Haley was doing this test knit, signed up for it, and I knew that this was going to be the hat that I knit for Shawn so she could have her an everyday basic beanie. And so I cannot wait to give this to Shawn. She does know at this point that I knit it for her. I finished this, when did I finish this? February 25th. So it's been a while since I have finished this for her. I did tell her that I wanted to wash it first and to block it because I do want to see if I'm on gauge with the pattern. I need to check that, and I'll update that in my Ravelry. So now that I've washed it and blocked it, it is definitely ready for me to gift to her. And I hope that she won't mind that little pink here that's kind of showing. If she does, I'd be happy to knit her another one, and I'll take this one. But she's not picky. I think that she's going to love it. One thing that I do love about this hat is obviously just the cleverness of the scraps that are hidden within it. I love the squishiness of it from holding the sock yarn double, and I really like the decreases. So this hat is knit in 1x1 rib, and Haley did a beautiful job of keeping the 1x1 rib going as you knit the decreases. I think that they look very pretty and very neat. I think that Haley in one of her podcast episodes mentioned how she doesn't like when she knits ribbed hats in the ribbing, and then when it's time to do the decreases, there's no more of the ribbing. In this design, she wanted to have the ribbing continuing all through the tip of the hat, through the top of the hat, even as you do the decreases. So I like that too. Haley, you knocked it out of the park with this one. I don't know if you watched, but I just want to say thank you for letting me knit this. Thank you for letting me test knit it. Haley is a wonderful designer. I had some issues when I was sewing the brim together. So like I said, this is a triple thick brim. This part right here, I actually knit first and folded up and sewed together. And I had some issues with that. You could, when I did it the first time, you could see the red peeking through, not this inner part here, but the outer part of the brim, and you would actually see this on your head, and I didn't like that. So Haley and I just kind of worked through it, and we sent videos back and forth on Instagram, and she was just very patient with me and just very gracious, and I appreciated her just taking her time to work through that with me. So thank you, Haley, and that made the testing experience very enjoyable for me. Okay, so I'm looking at the time here, and I'm really trying to make sure that I don't take up too much of your time with this podcast, but when you go 2 months without getting up here and updating about your projects, it kind of takes a while. So I'll try to speed it up at this point. I only have 2 other things to share. So those are all of my finished objects, and now I'll get into whips. And like I said, I have 2 works in progress. The first work in progress that I want to share with you is a pair of socks. When I finish one pair of socks, I always immediately cast on another pair. And so this is the pair of socks that I'm currently working on. Okay, I gotta untangle. Whew. So these are a pair of self-striping socks. And the yarn that I'm using is Barocco Socks. I picked this up from one of my local yarn stores when they were having a sale. You know me, I am very frugal. I like a discount. So when I saw this yarn on sale for 50% off, I snatched it up. So yes, this is Barocco Socks, S-O-X. This is sock weight yarn. It is 75% superwash wool and 25% nylon. And I think I've just gotten so used to using superwash yarn, or not superwash yarn, but merino sock yarn, that this yarn does feel a little more rustic in my hands when I'm knitting with it. But it's okay. This yarn takes me back to when I first started knitting socks, and I used Peyton's sock yarn, and it has the same feel as that, like very, very rustic. But that yarn softened up with wear, so I imagine that this yarn will soften up too. Oh, I don't think that there's an actual colorway. It's just 1455. But I really like the colors. I think that it's very spring-like and gets me in the mood for warmer weather with the orange and the green and the pink and the purple and the blue. So yeah, this yarn is a little more rustic, but I think that the socks that I have that I knit before with Peyton's sock yarn. I think that those hold up better than my superwash merino yarn does, or my superwash merino socks do. So I'm okay with this being a little more rustic. So again, these socks are for me. I'm knitting the size medium. They are on my ChowGoo red lace needles, size 1 US 2.25 millimeter needles. The only thing that I really have to say about this sock is something that I wish I had done was, like I said, I'm very lazy when I knit socks. I don't like to think about them. I don't like to plan them. I don't like to do anything too involved. And so because this yarn was already self-striping, I just was knitting and really not paying attention to what I was doing. And then I noticed that I had this little pearl bump right after the cuff where the yarn changed color. If you can see that little pearl bump in the orange color right underneath the cuff. And the reason I have that there is because what you should do when you are knitting with a contrast color, or if you're knitting with self-striping yarn, to avoid that bump is you can do just one knit round in your old color that's only knits. So no pearls, no ribbing, your first color that you're using. That way, when you're ready to switch to your new color, you won't have those little pearl bumps there because you used a knit round. I believe that's how you do it. I didn't do it in this sock, so I'll try that for the next sock and see if that works out. Like I said, it's been so long since I've used self-striping yarn that I forgot about that. The only other thing to note about this pair of socks is I chose not to do a contrast heel. I used a contrast heel for my Enchanted Village socks and for Aiden's socks. And when you do a contrast heel and toe or cuff, whichever parts you're using it for, you end up with a lot of ends to weave in. And I didn't want to weave in a whole lot of ends for this sock. I only wanted the end on the top and the end on the bottom. And so because of that, my stripe pattern is interrupted. So you can see where I was knitting here, and you've got the purple and the pink and the orange, and then you've got green, but instead of going back into the purple and the pink and the orange, there's a little tiny stripe of orange here and more green. So there's just more green here than there's supposed to be in the sock. And the reason is because instead of doing the heel in a contrast color, I used this yarn to do the heel. And so all of the pink and the purple and the orange that should have been on this side is on the heel. So to avoid that in the future, I could do two things that I know of. I could use a contrast heel color here so that whenever I go to pick back up and start knitting the gusset, this stripe won't be interrupted and the same pattern or the same stripe pattern will continue down the front of the foot. Another thing that I've seen people do is they do an afterthought heel. So you knit the entire sock from the cuff to the toe, and then you actually go in and cut your yarn. Scary, I know. I've never done that before. And then you do the heel after. So an afterthought heel. So that's another way where you could continue the stripe sequence without interrupting the sequence there. I don't really care that much. I mean, I notice it, but it's not something that I really care about. You know, socks are just going to be on my feet, so I don't really care that the stripes aren't perfectly the same all the way from the top to the bottom. But those are some things that I could do if that was something that I cared about. Or that's something that you could do if that's something that you care about when you're knitting stripy socks. I am so hot in this cardigan. Like I said, it's 50 degrees outside today, so it's not super cold, it's not super warm, but it is hot up here in this cardigan with this mohair. Oh my goodness. And I really love y'all, so I'm suffering through it. Let me turn the fan on. That's better. Mohair, wool, in March. I don't think that this is a good idea. but I'm gonna keep on going. So the last thing that I want to share with you today is a whip that I am currently working on. It is my favorite whip of the two. It is the Wood Anemone Pullover by Sari Nordlund. And I watched one of her podcast episodes and she titled it, or the way she pronounced it was Wood Anemone Pullover. And I don't know if that's just a difference in cultures, but when I look at that word, to me, I think of Finding Nemo and and he called the sea, you know, where he lived, an anemone. Anyway. The way I pronounce it is Wood Anemone Pullover. She pronounces it Wood Anemone Pullover. If anyone can help out with that, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, this is the pullover by Sari Nordlund. And the reason that I am knitting this is because I enjoy knitting my Salty Days sweater by Veronica Lindbergh so much. I enjoyed the lace and I enjoyed the cables that I was really wanting to knit something that was a little more intricate like that again. But I didn't want to knit an entire sweater with those intricate details. So the Wood Anemone Pullover is a good balance of the two. So you have your lace intricate details on the top portion of the sweater, and then you have your stockinette for the rest of the body and stockinette for the sleeves. So that is why I picked this pattern. Right now I'm in that I've got a focus lace section of the pullover, which I'm actually really enjoying when I do get the time to focus and actually do it. And then I'm looking forward to the day when I'm finished with that part of the sweater and I can just knit the stockinette. I cannot wait for just stockinette, stockinette, stockinette in the round. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce the suggested yarn for this pattern because I know I'm gonna mess it all up, but I'll put it on the screen. This is the suggested yarn. It is fingering weight yarn plus lace held together to get a DK weight. And I actually decided to go for something different. I decided to use Sennesgarn Peer Gynt. Sennesgarn Peer Gynt, which is 100% Norwegian wool, and it is their DK weight. So I'm still using the same weight of yarn, but I'm not holding the two together. And here's what I have so far. I like to look at it like this. You can kind of see the lace a little better. If I move all of my ends out of the way. So pretty. So the gauge for this pattern is about 20 stitches per inch per 4 inches. So of course it's that DK weight. And you actually use 3 different needle sizes. So you use your smaller needle size to knit the collar, and then you use a medium size needle to knit the lace work, and then you use your largest needles to knit the body. I decided to do something a little different though, because my collar, when I knit it the first time with my smallest size needle, was way, way small. So this is the first collar that I did, and I saved it just so that I can show you all. And then this is the second collar. It still looks a little small, but it definitely has more stretch than the first collar. See if I can hold the two up. This might be tricky. You can see I kind of have to move my hand through this first one just to get it to open up, and this one just kind of relaxes by itself. So anyway, I was going to stick with this collar, but I tried it on and I showed my husband and my mom too. You know, your husband and your mother, they're going to be the most honest people that you have. So my husband and my mother both said, that looks like it's for Aubrey, our 2-year-old. And they were right. I tried it on and I felt like I was being suffocated. So that is why I decided to re-knit the collar. And instead of using the smallest needle size that was suggested, I'm using the medium needle size. that I had decided to use, because I'm not using her needle sizes because my gauge didn't match her gauge. Instead of using the smallest needle size that I had picked, I'm using the same needle size for the collar that I'm using for the lace. So I casted this on January 23rd, and it is now March, what day is it? March 10th. So I think I might be over my 2-month mark on this one, but that's okay. Oh, the colorway for this is lilac, by the way. So I casted this on back then, and I knit 2 gauge swatches in the round, because this is the first yoked sweater that I've ever done. I don't think I said that before. I've never done a yoked sweater. I've done a raglan, I've done drop shoulder constructions, and so with this being my first yoked sweater, I made sure that I did my swatches in the round, because I'm never going to be knitting flat. All right, so I did not get gauge the first time that I did this. Sari suggested that you use a US size 6, which is a 4mm needle, and I did not get gauge. I think it was this swatch. So I decided to go down a needle size and swatch with that one. And so for this swatch, I went down to a 3.5mm needle, which is a US 4. So my gauge for each of these swatches was a little bit larger than her gauge on the pattern. Like I said, her gauge was 20 stitches per 4 inches, and my gauge was 17 for the first swatch with the suggested needle size, and then 18 stitches with the second one. So my gauge was definitely bigger than her gauge, and I knew that I was going to have to make a decision. I did not want to go down another needle size because I like the drape of this fabric. I didn't want it to be any stiffer than this. So I decided that it was time for me to put on my big girl knitting breeches and do some knitting math. And that's what I did. Now, I am a visual person, so when I did my math, I actually drew it out on my notebook paper here. Aubrey got a hold to it, so she also did some of her very own math. But you can see that I did 2 different charts. So on the first chart, I took the US 4 needle where I had gone down to a size 3.5mm, and I did some math to try to figure out, with my gauge of 18 stitches per 4 inches, how big the sweater would be in the end. The pattern calls for you to knit a size that's going to give you about 2 to 6 inches of positive ease, and that's exactly what I wanted for this sweater. I didn't want anything to be too oversized. I wanted to have the fit that Sari had in the photos where she was modeling her sweater. I thought it looked beautiful on her, so that was the kind of fit that I was going for. But my gauge was too big. So if I decided to use the original needle size that she suggested in the pattern, which was 4mm, when I did the math, that would give me about 8.75 inches of positive ease, which is too big. So I did the math for the second needle size, which was a little bit smaller, 3.5mm, which is, I guess, about half a needle size when you think about it. And so for that gauge, I would get about 6.2 inches of positive ease. And so that's right about where she suggests in the pattern. So that's the size needle that I decided to use. And so the size that I decided to knit was a size 2. So for a size 2 in her pattern, that's a 37.5-inch bust. Like I said, my bust is around 36 inches. Once you calculate the amount of ease, the bust area will be bigger than that circumference. So when I did the math for 18 stitches per 4 inches, my bust with positive ease included in would be about 42 1/4 inches. So that would give me about 6.2 inches of positive ease. I hope that I'm not losing you. I know that knitting math can be a little bit overwhelming, at least it is for me. So the way that you can do this, if this is something that you want to do, if you don't want to go up a needle size and create a looser fabric or down a needle size and create a more dense fabric, is you want to look for the size and the pattern that's going to give you the bust circumference that you want. So I looked for the size 2 in the pattern, and I looked for the stitch count in the pattern that would give me. And you have to have the stitch count that you would get when you start knitting the bust in the pattern. So I had to keep going a little bit down in the pattern to look and see how many stitches for the size 2 I would be using when I got to the bust area. I hope I didn't say the actual number of stitches, because this is a paid for pattern. I looked for how many stitches I was going to increase to for the bust, and I took that number and divided that by how many stitches per inch I had. And that gave me how many inches around my sweater would be in the end. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, I'm really sorry. After doing the drawing and figuring that out for myself, I went to a tutorial on YouTube to check my work to see if, I was doing the right math. And I will link that below so that if that's something that you're interested in doing, you can feel confident in taking the gauge that you have, picking a size, doing a little bit of math, and figuring out the end circumference of what you would have if you were to use that needle size for that particular size in the pattern. Like I said, this is how much I have so far, and I am about halfway through, maybe a little more than halfway through the lace chart on the pattern. And something that I really, really enjoyed about this pattern is that Sari included a lace chart for the lace work, but then she also included written instructions for the lace part if someone is not so comfortable in looking at a chart, which I really enjoy looking at the chart. I like having the visual of what I'm supposed to be doing there, but if you're not comfortable with that, she also has written descriptions for the lace section of the sweater. One thing that I'm doing to make sure that I don't have too many mistakes in the lace work is I am putting a stitch marker every so-and-so stitches. I'm not going to tell you how many because it's a paid for pattern, but every time you see a marker, that is a lace repeat in the pattern. So instead of me anxiously trying to figure out, do I have the right number of stitches, and this is just a way that eases my worries as I'm knitting the lace. As long as I have the right amount of stitches in these segments and my little leaves aren't looking too wonky, I know that I am on the right track. If I bring it a little bit closer, you can kind of see the lace motif, or the lace motif, which are falling leaves is what it reminds me of. So here's a little leaf here. Sorry, I'm using my middle finger. And then the second leaf is kind of offset to the left and right of that first one. And so I finished the first leaf, the next row of leaves, and now I'm beginning to work on the third leaf, which is, here's one right here. All right, I am going to stop talking now. This has gotten to be way too long. If you're still here, thank you for sticking around with me. I know that I was a little flustered in this one, and it's just because it's been so long, and I want to make sure that I give you all the information that you may need if you decide to knit any of the patterns that I have. I won't go into the patterns that I'm going to be knitting in the future because we just don't have time for that, but I will be sure to share those with you in the next episode. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave comments. It really does help us to grow this channel, and I really love interacting with you in those comments. It is the highlight of my day when I see that someone has left a comment, and I can't wait to respond to all of them, and I do try to respond to all of them. So thank you for those of you who have been interacting with me in the comments, and I look forward to chatting with you after this one. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.